Everybody, and good morning, good day, or good evening, depending from when you are watching this. Welcome to our ONERECAP, RawWorks Converge 2020. My name is Chris Twiest. With me is Niek Boevink, and today we are talking to our guest, Jan Tytgat, and we are talking about his session about automating with the Nitro API and with their own tools on Citrix ADC. So thank you, welcome Jan, and I hope we have some good questions for you.
Thank you. Hello everybody.
Jan, for the people who don't know you, can you please introduce yourself for our viewers real quick?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jan Tytgat. I'm living in Belgium. I'm 38 years old. I've been working as a Citrix ADC consultant for about 10 years now, with a past in Citrix virtual apps and desktops as well. But I quickly migrated to the more interesting stuff, at least for me, which is the ADC from Citrix. And since then, I've been exploring the appliance thoroughly. So I'm going real down into the mechanics of how it works.
You're the opposite of me. You went down into the ADC, and I stuck to Citrix virtual apps and desktops, went into that way.
Yeah, correct.
Cool. Niek, do you want to start with the first question?
Yeah. In your session, you say that the Citrix ADC still feels like a black box for a lot of admins. Why do you think that this is?
Well, first of all, it's an appliance that actually sits in the middle of your network. So if you configure it correctly, or if you use the appliance to the function that you bought it for, pretty much all of the traffic has to go through a Netscaler, because it's not only a load balancer, but in my point of view, it's also a security appliance. That being said, because it is partly a network appliance, it's a security appliance, and it has the nice feature of the Citrix logo in the front, that makes it very hard to position within the organizational structure of an organization. And the Citrix guys tell, well, this is for us, but not for the network guys. The network guys say, no, this is Citrix. And the security guys said, yeah, this is not a security device. So that is one problem. A second thing that you have to consider is that the learning curve to use a Citrix ADC to its fullest is quite steep. It's not like you have a wizard where you do have wizards, but I don't recommend on using them. It's not like having a wizard where you can just click, next, finish, and everything is working as it is supposed to be working. You have to really think about how you are deploying the application and the appliance itself as well. So because it has a steep learning curve, nobody wants to manage it. And yeah, once it's configured and you have a pretty static organization with not a lot of changes, it just gets forgotten because it's running as it should be. And if you don't do any changes when it's running, you don't have to touch it anymore, besides upgrade for security. So that's why for many administrators, it's really a black box, because they don't touch it enough.
So how did you like presenting at a Citrix event for the first time, and digital?
Yeah, digital. That was the biggest hurdle, because normally I was scheduled to present at Synergy this year, but due to COVID, that didn't happen, so it was postponed. I was then thinking of doing it at E2EVC, but that one, yeah, is pretty much cancelled as well. And so when the registrations came in for Converge, I was really thinking, okay, let's do this. But then I got a bit sidetracked because it was quite busy at the time. And in the end, Citrix contacted me with a question if I wanted to do a presentation anyway, because they wanted to have some session instead of ones presented by people from Citrix. So yeah, it was quite a challenge, because I got a message a week before the deadline to enter the video. So I had to prepare my demo environment. I had to prepare the session, write the scripts, do the recordings, which I struggled tremendously with. So yeah, it was challenging, but I think I got a feel of it, and I'm already planning some follow-up videos and starting a YouTube channel instead of blogging. So
yeah. That's great to hear.
Awesome.
That's the result. So in your session, you use a lot of. You mentioned that you use a lot of framework and tools. And how did you find the right one? And do you evaluate them from time to time?
Well, that depends on your question, Nick. What do you mean with frameworks? Because all the frameworks that I'm showing are the ones that I developed myself in combination with some of my colleagues. I mean, for example, CoreLogic I developed with my lay colleague Roel Schrijvers, that you know as well.
Yeah.
The Nitro SDK for .NET Core, that's one I developed completely by myself and with an intern that that worked with us for a year. So yeah, it's pretty much built in-house, those frameworks.
Yeah, but I can imagine that you are able to combine even some of them for the future, or is that something that's on your roadmap, or do you think keep it separate is something that it's the way to go?
Well, definitely. Well, CoreLogic has been my main framework to install and configure a Citrix ADC for the last 5 to 6 years. That framework is still evolving. There are still features being added or changed. And then from the point of the Nitro SDK, well, I always wanted to have some kind of a GUI application to manage CoreLogic, because it's quite sensitive to typos if you do it manually on the command line. So I wanted to present a GUI application, but for that I need to talk with the Nitro APIs. Now, of course, Citrix has a couple of SDKs, but I'm most familiar with C# and .NET. And because I wanted my application to be able to run on Windows, Linux, and Mac applications, or run in a web server, I really needed to use .NET Core. So I started from scratch and built the Nitro SDK for .NET Core all by myself, and looked at how I needed to interact with the actual APIs to create a framework that is easy to use for me. So now that one's more or less in place, I can start building on a Nitro GUI, let's say, for core layer. I'm planning to write a configuration visualizer so that you get all the load balancers and stuff like that out of the configuration, and you get a nice visual diagram out of it. I'm working on Let's Encrypt integration. So one part is talking to Let's Encrypt, of course. But on the other hand, you want to be able to catch the challenges on the Netscaler instead of having to run a web server. So I'm writing the integration with the ADC by using Nitro APIs so that the challenge from Let's Encrypt can be handled by the ADC instead of on a backend web server. So those are all the kinds of stuff that are coming to life right now because I have the SDK and I can pretty quickly write something up right now. So yeah, the roadmap is full, and the challenge will be finding the time to actually complete all the IDs because I have pretty much 5 to 10 years of IDs in my back. So yeah, it will be a challenge to complete them.
Okay. So why do you think it is important to use infrastructure as code for the Citrix ADCs?
Well, as I mentioned before, infrastructure as code for ADCs is important because it is a black box. And if you are deploying an application in your infrastructure, you are also kind of adopting a DevOps culture right now. Hopefully, that's I think some of the major goals in the next 10 years for many companies. So if you're doing infrastructure as code for your applications, why not do the same thing for your ADC appliances? So that if you have a basic setup available, the only thing that you need to do is create a server, create a service group, create a load balancer, attach it to a content switch using a content switching policies. Good tip, use core layer because it will easily help you. And if you have infrastructure as code running then the only steps that you need to know are exactly those 5 steps that I just mentioned. You don't need to worry about what is a load balancer, what is a service group. You don't need to have that knowledge anymore. So instead of having a black box with a lot of options, you now get some kind of a white box with a very strict API that you can talk to by using Terraform or Ansible or a custom PowerShell script or something like the things that we are developing.
Okay.
Is that more or less an answer to your question, or?
Yeah. And what do you think about with infrastructure as code, like the redeployability and the automatic documentation, because the documentation is the script?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very important. So if you can combine that with something that can visualize your config, then you have great documentation on how is my application actually flowing through my network and through the ADC to the point where it needs to be. And that's, I think, one of the most forgotten things in IT nowadays. That okay, you have infrastructure as code, fine. You have documentation on how something is set up, great. But if you're running into troubles, you're not going to read the documentation. You need to have some kind of quick overview into how your applications are running through your network, who has access to what, how it is being accessed. And I believe strongly in having something visual. For the last 10 years, I hate writing documentation. I just hate documentation because if you deploy a NetScaler or an ADC as it should, the only thing that you need is a Visio diagram which shows you which components are linked. And then you have a ton of them because, for example, if you have 20 applications, you will have 20 Visio diagrams, but the drawing itself is self-explanatory. So you don't need to look at the documentation, which is often 100, 200 pages long, where you can't find anything in it. So that's to me why infrastructure as code is important, and having the right tools to document things is very important nowadays.
Nice answer. Right.
And Jan, does your core box also support Azure ADC?
Yeah, sure. I mean, an Azure ADC is a normal ADC which is running on a computer somewhere else.
Yeah,
the deployment is different, but in the end, the only thing that we do from CoreBox is actually talk to the ADC using the Nitro API. So as long as I can connect to a NetScaler IP address or a subnet IP address with management enabled, I can do the necessary API calls. And because we are not storing anything on the local box, we are not modifying the rc.netscaler, for example. We just use the publicly available APIs from an ADC. So as long as I can talk with the ADC or open an SSH connection to it, I can do pretty much everything I want or need.
So your product is cloud ready?
Yeah, I mean, if you watch the video closely, in the beginning, I was demonstrating the quickness of using Packer to develop a image to be deployed on a hypervisor. But if you look at the documentation for Packer, they have pretty much every cloud provider covered. So if you want to deploy a VM, okay, just go to AWS, define the instance name that you want, which type of instance you need, put it in the variables, launch Packer. Okay, it needs to be able to communicate with your but it's all native functionalities being provided by the operating system, by the cloud provider or the infrastructure provider for that case. It's running standard bash scripts in the console once it's launched, and the same goes for Terraform or Kubernetes. It was a lot of work, and it's also quite a lovely learning curve. But once you get a feel to move around with all the different options in the packages, it becomes quite simple to just pick and solutions for everything you need.
Great feedback, Jan, and thank you very much for your time. One last question. Is there any other session that you would like to recommend from Citrix Converge?
Yeah, well, actually, last night I watched the Python versus PowerShell session from Elcho and Ryan, which are colleagues of you, Chris. And I sent an email, a message to Elcho late in the evening that I was tearing up from laughing. It was a funny presentation. It had a nice drive, And even though it was funny to watch because I watched it at double the speed instead of regular speed, it really had a good vibe to it. And although they went along pretty fast, you got a nice overview of what is PowerShell against Python, because I hate PowerShell. I just can't get my head around it. I know it's a powerful language and I should invest more time in it. But if I have to look at that session, I'm more of a Python guy. I'm not a PowerShell guy.
Yeah.
And so from that point of view, I learned some things from the session, even on the basics of PowerShell. So yeah, I thought it was really cool to see if you how you can start going with APIs and how you need to integrate it with other things. Yeah.
Great teaser for that session here, Jan. And thanks for being part of this interview. And everybody out there, thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.